Hello? Yeah.
We can hear you.
Yeah, thank you everyone for your patience. As again, we made some adjustments here. Again, it's a work session, and we in work sessions we typically have dialogue with amongst the board and with staff, administrative team members, and so that's kind of how we had to rearrange things to facilitate that dialogue. At the same time, the information that we will be reviewing and seeing, you'll see on the screen to the right here as well. So with that, I think we're turning it over to Ross. Amy, you teeing this up? Okay, Ross. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having us out here today to talk about a new initiative in the district. My name is Ross Veldier, and I'm a PBIS specialist. And this is Heather Stauffer, who is another PBIS specialist. We've entitled our presentation Supporting the Whole Child because when we think of today's educational climate, we know that we have students coming to us from a variety of situations, many of situations that we've never experienced growing up. And kids are coming to us with needs that we've never experienced either. And so we feel like it's our duty as educators to meet the needs of all of our students so that they can achieve academic and social skills to be successful in life. So when you think of supporting the whole child through social-emotional learning, this is going to be kind of our agenda for tonight. So first of all, we're going to talk about what is the definition of SEL, and SEL is an acronym for social-emotional learning. What is the purpose? What are we trying to accomplish with this work in the district? Alignment, so how does this align to previous work that we've already done in the past few years? And game plan, what is the plan for this pilot implementation of this initiative this year? So first of all, we're going to talk about the definition. What is social-emotional learning? So what is social-emotional learning? Social-emotional learning is an integral part of education and human development. SEL is the process through which all young people and adults acquire and apply the knowledge, skills, and attitudes to develop healthy identities, manage emotions and achieve personal and collective goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain supportive relationships, and make responsible and caring decisions. And if we think of students that we want to raise in our schools and raise for Hudsonville, like aren't these skills that we just want our kids to be able to obtain, right? To have, to be able to set personal goals, to have healthy identities, to be able to feel and show empathy. These are foundational skills that we feel like our students need here in Hudsonville. And a lot of our work is based off of CASEL, which stands for, it's the Collaborative for Academics and Social-Emotional Learning. And it is a resource that is used by schools, but not only schools, organizations and businesses across the country. And it provides frameworks and it provides resources for schools and organizations also. The Michigan Department of Education has actually adopted these 5 competencies as their framework for the schools in Michigan are trying to come up with social-emotional frameworks and tools and things. This is their competencies. And as we're thinking of like what these are, these can be related to like academic standards. So we know that we have academic standards in math, and social studies, and reading. They have 5 competencies that are fundamental to social-emotional learning. So number 1 is self-management. Number 2 is self-awareness. Number 3 is responsible decision-making. Number 4 is relationship skills. Number 5 is social awareness. And then within that, it gives like what that looks like in the classrooms. And these are just examples. So first of all, self-management might look like identifying and using stress management strategies. Self-awareness might look like recognizing and labeling emotions. Responsible decision-making might look like demonstrating academic behaviors. Relationship skills, paying attention to others when they are speaking. It's a pretty important one, right? Social awareness, recognize that words and actions can hurt others. So I've given you some examples of what social-emotional learning is. These are some things that social-emotional learning is not. First of all, it's nothing new. I can say as an educator that's taught for over 15 years that I have always been teaching my skills related to social-emotional learning, right? How to be kind to each other, how to be empathetic, how to hear someone else's viewpoint, how to handle conflict appropriately, right? The thing I never liked that I never had as an educator was any training or any tools or any resources to help me as a teacher in the classroom. I was always finding stuff off Teachers Pay Teachers or talking to my colleagues or finding stuff on Google for hours of how to deal with these issues. But in the sense of what social-emotional learning is, this is nothing new that we've done as educators, right? We've always done things like this. It's not therapy or counseling. Okay, we are not therapists. We are not counselors. We are not trying to fill that void with students. There is nothing in social-emotional learning or in the curriculum that we have that deals anything with gender identity or sexual orientation. And finally, it's not trying to replace any type of belief system. Again, what this is it's teaching kids skills and strategies for how to identify emotions, how to understand emotions, how to regulate emotions. For example, one of the tools that we're using in classrooms right now that teachers are developing with students is something called a classroom charter. And in this charter, classrooms have conversations about how do we want to feel in this place. all the way from kindergarten to 5th grade. And some think they might say we want to feel appreciated, or we want to feel happy, or we want to be listened to. And then what does that look like in the classroom? Students are having conversations around how are we going to show those behaviors to each other in the classroom? What specific things are we going to do? So again, it's not replacing a belief system, but it's giving kids skills and strategies and tools to be able to show this in the classroom and in the schools. So what is the purpose of SEL? Why is it important? Research suggests that children with higher emotional intelligence are better able to pay attention, are more engaged in school, have more positive relationships, and are more empathetic. And again, if we're thinking of the kind of students that we want to raise and the children that we want to bring up in Hudsonville, these skills and these measures are things that we definitely want to do. We can also think of how emotions impact learning, right? As adults, we can think of tons of situations of how emotions impact us in our daily way, right? If I have a stressful day at work, that sometimes is going to transfer into how I deal with my family at home, right? Students that are dealing with emotionally charged situations at home might come to school and have a hard time focusing, have a hard time paying attention, have a hard time growing academically. So emotions impact attention and memory, right? If we have heightened emotions, or you're stressed, or you're anxious or nervous, it can be hard to pay attention and hard to remember what's going on in the classroom. It can be difficult to have proper decision-making and judgment, right? Especially if we can think of situations of when you're heightened emotionally, you're upset or frustrated, it can be really difficult to make sound, responsible decisions. Emotions affect relationships. Emotions affect physical and mental health. So students and people that are in constantly stressful or anxious situations, it can affect them physically, but can also affect their mental health in the long term. And everyday effectiveness, right? People who have a harder time regulating emotions and managing emotions have a harder time functioning day to day. They have a harder time in their workplace, harder time in school, harder time being a parent, right? So the last part today that I have is that academic learning is impacted by social and emotional skills and competencies, and that students who are able to manage emotions are more able to persevere and achieve their potential.
Okay. This brings us into alignment, and what we want to think about is how this work aligns with all of the things that Hudsonville has put in place previously, and also why we're prioritizing social emotional learning at this time. So if you look at our journey to ruler, it started in 2019 with PBIS, and for those of you that don't know PBIS, that's Positive Behavior Interventions and Support, and a lot of us also know that as SOAR. There are behavior expectations that we have in our elementary buildings. We were able to embed trauma-informed practices through learning that developmental enhancement shared with us and Dr. Stephanie Grant. That led us into the fall of 2020, coming back from COVID. And the Michigan Department of Ed laid out the Return to Learn roadmap. Our teachers were checking in with students daily. And then we also taught some high leverage rapid response strategies so that teachers could respond to behavior or feelings that students might have come back with after they missed school. In that time, we realized that there was a gap, that teachers were really struggling to meet the needs of some of their kiddos. And in gathering feedback on some of our response strategies, we realized what teachers were asking for is more social emotional learning resources. That led to a committee being put together, and in winter of 2020, we reviewed and evaluated 8 curriculums. And then in fall of 2021, we are piloting Ruler. And the goal of piloting Ruler is to increase district-wide consistency. One thing that Ross mentioned is that a lot of teachers have been implementing social emotional tools within their classrooms, but it has not been consistent. You might have a first grade teen that's using a specific tool, or a 5th grade teacher that feels really passionate about this. But as a district, it was just a little bit disheveled. Our goal is to make sure that all of our teachers have the skills they need to meet the needs of all of our kiddos. If we think about PBIS and SEL, I know that's a lot of acronyms, so that's Positive Behavior Supports and also Social Emotional Learning. They go together really nicely. They include two separate frameworks, but they parallel each other. So if you take a skill from our behavior expectation, such as keep hands and feet to yourself, an SEL competency that parallels that is that students can use positive communication to interact with others. So it's not something that's completely separate. We're just looking at two skills through a lens of behavior and also social emotional functioning. I also wanted to note that a lot of people like donuts and coffee for breakfast. So I always think of our PBIS expectations as the donut and our social emotional competencies as the coffee. I don't even drink coffee, but people say they go better together. And I would say PBIS and SEL are very similar in that way. If you look at this graphic, I want to draw your attention just to the middle section. While there are some differences between PBIS and SEL, there are so many similarities. Both are preventative. Both promote a caring and positive school climate and also foster positive interactions. Both include modeling and teaching as well as explicit skill instruction. So now we need to talk about what's our game plan and our plan to move forward for the remainder of this year. We are piloting Ruler, and that pilot began September 7th. We have a PBIS specialist in every elementary building, and we're able to help prepare and lead professional development so our teachers feel they can implement this tool in the classroom. We're also assigned to a grade level. So you have a grade level expert from pre-K to 5th grade that can answer questions about the curriculum and make any adjustments or modifications so it meets the needs of our students. We also plan to elicit feedback, so we're going to survey our stakeholders throughout the year. That includes staff, students, and families. We want to make sure that this tool is the right fit and that, that we see positive results. So probably most importantly is this is going to help us make adjustments. This is just a pilot year and it's a new curriculum, so there's a learning curve. As far as the Ruler curriculum, this is just a brief overview. Ruler is an acronym, and each letter represents a skill or an area of focus. So the R is that students can recognize emotions in themselves and others. The U is that they can understand the causes and consequences of an emotion. L, label, with accurate words and nuanced vocabulary. Express, that they can express their emotions differently depending on context. And the R is that they can regulate emotions with helpful strategies. If you look at our evaluation, there are 3 ways that we can evaluate whether the Ruler is the right tool for us here in Hudsonville. 1, teachers have a performance task. It's the 4th activity at the end of every unit, and it allows a teacher to gauge whether or not students can perform a specific skill, whether it's using the vocabulary or using a specific strategy that was taught. We're also looking at our behavior referral data, knowing that making mistakes is part of learning and we're not looking for perfection, but we're hoping that we would see some positive changes in our behavior data. And then also our teacher feedback to make sure that this tool is a good fit, that our students are engaged, and that we can fill any implementation gaps. This next slide is a brief overview of the communication timeline for our Ruler pilot. We want to make sure that our stakeholders are informed, so we have gotten in front of our inter-school advisory committee, and our next step would be to present to parent clubs. And then in December, we would start the formal board curriculum review process. Talk to us about your questions.
So right now, are the teachers learning about this curriculum and have they started to implement it? And will we implement K through 12? And how does it look like in the high school? I can see where it would work like in elementary and middle school, Is it during advisory period, or where does this fit?
I'm not going to speak to middle school and high school. That isn't part of our plan yet. I'm sure Mandy or somebody else could probably speak to that. Right now, we are just doing pre-K through 5, and we're about a month into it. So we had some teacher development trainings before school started. We met with grade level teams this past week to give them more in-depth knowledge about upcoming units. But we're just, again, in the very early phases of implementation. We just started early in September for pre-K through 5.
It can be aligned K through 12.
Will that be the goal to go K through 12 eventually, or?
I think because it's a pilot, we can say that if this is the right fit, we would want, we did choose a curriculum that could be pre-K through 12, yes. So if this curriculum passes the board policy, then yes, over years or however.
I think where we landed with the evaluation stage is that we did feel like it was a confident good fit for pre-K through 5, and if in the future we look at 6-12 and we come back to that, we know that this will provide alignment, but we didn't necessarily make concrete plans about the timing of that or whether or not how that would meld with the middle school and high school initiative with positive behavior intervention supports. It's just that it has the potential to be an option because it has lessons that make it more developmentally appropriate as kids get older.
And there's different, I looked at our curriculum, so there's different curriculums other than ruler. And why did we select ruler compared to other ones?
I think one is just the ability to provide a train-the-trainer model.
We can't hear anything.
Do you want a microphone?
Sure. It's got DEIB. Sure, so the team that reviewed the different curricular options used what's called a Hexagon Tool, and it looked at different factors that we might perceive through the lens of context, through the lens of training capacity, how many resources it was able to provide, the contextual fit, and the developmental appropriateness. I think the last one was like looking at the longitudinal evidence data. And so each committee member was able to review each of the options separately and provide their own rating or ranking. And then we came back together as a group to look at that overall data and make a consensus about which one we felt was most appropriate to pilot.
Ross and Heather, maybe you could talk a little bit about what we discussed in the curriculum committee meeting about how this is also a tool to engage parents to provide support to them if they're having issues with their child at home.
Yeah, sure. So, that's loud. So like we've kind of said, we've taken some initial steps to just inform parents of what the tool is. There's some communication upcoming from principals pretty soon with that. There's an Appleseed article that's going out also. That's our goal in the next month or two to also go to parent clubs and buildings and train them. I think that the more transparent that we can be about the program and the curriculum, that hopefully the better parents feel about this. And there's parent information that's going to come home through the curriculum itself, so parents will be educated about, for example, what their student, similar to kind of what parents are getting now for like before they start a math unit, they'll make it a little information going home saying this is what's going to be in the math unit. Parents should get something similar about what the ruler curriculum is. They'll also be seeing student work coming home. I know in some of the classrooms that I've been seeing, there's also student work that's happening there. So we're hoping that through some of those avenues with parent clubs and information going home, and again, parents are always welcome to come talk to principals at buildings. The curriculum is available at buildings for parents to look at too. So we're hoping as this pilot year goes on that parents feel more comfortable with the pieces in the curriculum moving forward.
Can you maybe share a couple examples of this in practice? And you share the example of like a classroom charter and how the class, but can you share a couple more examples of what this like tactically might feel like in the classrooms for kids?
Sure. So I was in a second grade classroom and they were learning about the power of positive thinking and shifting from the negative to the positive. And all of the examples were school specific. You're going to do a test, it's something that's really hard for you. And they had a little cartoon and the student was saying, this is not going to go well. I'm not good at this, I'm going to fail. And then the students had to work together to come up with, how could we reframe this? So this could be positive, or at least make it more approachable. And then the kids worked in groups and they had to come up with, that student might say, this is really hard, but I'm gonna try my best, and I know my mom is always proud when I try my best. There were just ways to reframe thoughts and things that impact school, and there were several different kind of scenarios. Does that help?
It does, thank you. And then you said, so there's a PBIS specialist in each building, and then, did I hear correctly, each PBIS specialist is also assigned as a grade level
Yes.
expert. And how does that work then across? So it sounds like it's sort of a matrix, like.
It's a little complicated because we are in a building and we're expected to be able to coach pre-K to 5 or K to 5, depending on the building. But also, if I know that Ross is the 5th grade expert and I come across a question that I can't answer, he's my go-to before I connect with the teacher. But I also have a level of understanding of the curriculum. So far, I haven't come across anything that the teacher and I couldn't put our heads together and figure out. But we also have an expert.
So you talk about parent committee, parent group, school parent group meetings, and their staff surveys I see in late September and mid-November. So we'll be getting a lot of feedback from parents and from staff, and we'll be both informing, but then also tweaking and modifying based on what we're hearing in terms of making that right fit.
Yes, for sure. We've already started adapting some of the activities if we felt like they weren't the best fit for some of our students. And then we also started putting a survey together already for teachers so that we can make these adaptations quickly.
We as a board can see the results of the surveys and the parent group meetings and get that feedback and give that information.
For sure, yeah. And our parent clubs, when we presented to them, they seemed really excited to have us get in front of their each individual building and felt like any misconceptions that were there could easily be talked through. So we have all connected with our individual parent clubs to get those started. And if there were other topics that parent clubs wanted us to continue to talk on, or a building specific issue or concern, we would definitely be available to coach around that or provide more learning opportunities for families.
Yeah, I have a little bit of Dutch background, so sometimes I live in the land of emotional denial. There might be a parent who would say, I don't want you to get into my kids' heads with regard to emotions. And as a child, might be a child that doesn't want to talk about their emotions for fear of being ridiculed, of saying how they feel. So how do you deal with that?
So one of the tools that comes with this curriculum that we're piloting this year is called the mood meter, and it allows kids to identify emotions with some instruction, vocabulary, and things that kind of go on throughout the year. And there's a check-in that's done in the classroom that can be completely anonymous. So this other students start seeing what that kid felt. The teacher is able to see that. And if the teacher wants to do some follow-up with that student, they may, but that's not always necessary. Again, some of that is for identifying patterns. So if we have a student that every day is identifying that they're feeling sad, that might be a red flag for that teacher. If we're kind of noticing some signs from that student physically, maybe their head is down or they're kind of droopy or not speaking up in class, might be kind of a red flag for that teacher, just to be able to check in with that student a little bit more, depending on that. Because this is a pilot year, if a parent was concerned about that, or if a student was concerned about that, we would definitely want to give information to the parent and the student to say, what this is and why this is beneficial. But again, this is a pilot year, so there would have an option to, possibly not be part of that particular check-in. That being said, though, the things with the curriculum are hopefully going to be ingrained kind of throughout the entire day of students learning, right? So even though there will be chunks of time in the day that's devoted to talking about the class charter or doing the social-emotional lesson, we're hoping that the language that teachers are using with students is ingrained in their practice throughout the day, and it just becomes part of that culture and part of that positive climate in that building and in that classroom. And
the parent who says, I just don't want you to get into my kid's head?
Sure. So I think that we would have an opportunity to have dialogue with that parent to inform them about what's going on with the curriculum. If, again, because this is the pilot phase, if the parent wanted to pull their kid out of that SEL time or have some adjustments for that student during that social emotional learning time, that would be a conversation I think that the parent could have with the principal or with us also. But she wants to say something. But also, you know, again, with the point of that, some of the concepts that are being taught with this are kind of ingrained throughout the day. So the student would still be part of possibly a charter conversation maybe later in the day. If, you know, again, I'm thinking as a classroom teacher, if my class was having a really hard time at recess that day with mean language or words or whatever, I might bring my class in after recess and we're going to kind of reference our charter and talk about that. If the student wasn't there for the building of that charter during that lesson time, they might have a hard time understanding, like, what is this thing? Why are we following this? What are the words with this? But if a student wanted to opt out or a parent wanted to opt out, that's a conversation I think that could be had with the principal.
I also just want to add to that the check-in is not something that the teacher sits down in a circle and then says, tell me about your childhood, or a serious check-in. It's a little more casual than that. And if a teacher did notice that a student is coming in and maybe is checking in the red zone, that would be an automatic phone call home and a parent and teacher connect. So it's information for parents and also teachers. And I think also your point about some kids not wanting to share things, I think our point of entry with them is that these activities can include characters in books, and it doesn't always have to be a check-in with yourself. You can start to see these feelings are normal because characters feel these, other kids feel these. It kind of normalizes it.
Conclusion of the pilot, I know we identified a few mechanisms of feedback, but how will we know if the pilot's been successful? Like, what are we looking for in general feedback or results?
Okay, the first piece of feedback from the teachers is really tell us about the contextual fit. How did this fit within the scope of your day, and how natural of a fit was it with the developmental appropriateness within your class conversations? I think we also, from the performance task, want to see, are students able to demonstrate that they were able to take away from the lesson target that was shared? So at a very simple level, when we're trying to build vocabulary, we want to have a sense from the performance task that students are able to demonstrate, you know, I understand what this agitated word means, and I can use it in context of either describing a scenario or using it in my writing. And so we're going to be looking for both demonstration of comprehension as well as the teacher's feedback that this was an appropriate contextual fit.
To carry on with Chad's question, and I know it's not a direct relationship of, you know, we're going to see, you know, test scores raised by X amount, but can you talk about academic performance and what you hope to see in the classroom, maybe not a specific child.
Yeah, I think because the ties to academic performance, there's so many factors that lead into that. We may never be able to isolate one variable as the attributor to that. But we do hope to see, as the example shared, is that we know that students can develop a sense of worry and anxiety around testing, right? We would want to be able to see that students were able to demonstrate some of those coping strategies or make requests that they've been taught to talk about, this is what I need in this moment, or to be able to advocate for themselves. I think we'd also want to, as we look at behavioral data around conflict, to see as we implement lessons around conflict resolution, are we seeing that students are carrying that out into the playground, in the lunchroom, et cetera. So there's a couple different ways that we'll view the behavioral data, understanding kind of a timeline of here's what our data look like, here's the intervention that we use from the curriculum to address that issue, and if we see a change.
And as we talked about earlier, that'll be continually reviewed with teachers, with classrooms, with parents, and parent club meetings, there'll be a strong engagement with parents around this.
Yeah, as they mentioned, the units always have a parent home or a home connection so that parents can see some of the examples that students were shared in the classroom and have an opportunity. It's certainly not a requirement, but to say, I understand that you're working around the word confidence. And some of the parent prompting is for the parents to share, this is a time that I felt this way, or when I didn't, that these are some of the coping strategies I used. And so we may not be able to ask sort of effectiveness ratings, but we certainly want to hear from parents about, was this an effective tool in terms of your dialogue for understanding what was happening in the classroom and the carryover into other settings. So sort of that, from the lens from home, how did you see this impacting your child's conversations at home? And I just wanted to mention too, this is not, we're not entering into this as a perceived that there's we're not initiating this in terms of replacing anything that's provided at home, right? We know that as parents, we all support our own children, and we talk about our own identities, our values and beliefs, and our emotional skill set. And so in entering into this curriculum, it's not as though we identify that this because someone's not doing that piece at home. It's because all students benefit from this explicit instruction to be able to learn around this together and also to be able to apply it in the school setting. So I guess I just wanted to name that in case that's one of the worries or wonders.
Maybe you talked about units. Is this something that's set up for daily teaching units? Is it set up for weekly teaching units? How's it structured?
So a unit is composed of 4 lessons that could be broken into any increment of time. The 4 units provide an introductory lesson and then an extension activity. We have an opportunity for the students to engage or apply that skill, and then a performance task. And those units are expected to take about 2 weeks. And our hope is to move through at least 10 units of study this year.
Other questions from the board? Comments? Okay, so it sounds like we'll be seeing this again after survey time and after PTC, parent group meetings and so forth, and have a chance to continue discussion around this and how it's working and so forth. And then again, our parent community can also engage in parent groups, talk to principals, talk to teachers, lots of ways for our parent communities to be part of the conversation and dialogue. Okay. Good. Any other questions or comments on the board?
Just thank you to Ross and Heather. Thank you for being here tonight and for the work you do. I can see your passion for our kids and supporting teachers.